Good morning and welcome to the Peace at the Polls California webinar. I'm going to turn this over to Cathy Darling-Allen to welcome you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Peace at the Polls. I'm so glad that you are all here. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Cathy Darling-Allen, Shasta County Clerk and Registrar of Voters, and I have the distinct honor of also serving as the board chair for the California Voter Foundation. I wanted to say a special thank you to Samantha Abelov with CVF for all her hard work in planning this event. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today. I'm really excited also to see that law enforcement from my area registered for this time together. Shout out to Shasta County Sheriff Michael Johnson and Reading Police Chief Reading Captain Brian Cole. My apologies. And my apologies if I missed any other locals that are online right now. I want to acknowledge my local partners precisely because that's what this hour is all about, connecting local election officials with their local law enforcement partners. We are all LEOs after all. I really love a universal acronym. We have had an eventful and intense couple of years here in Shasta County politically, and I'm very grateful for the support and cooperative spirit of my local law enforcement partners. Early this year, we conducted a local recall election of a county supervisor with very high emotion and energy, and the sheriff provided deputies to be stationed in our office on election night with no hesitation, and that was so reassuring for my staff. On election night this past June, when we had some, shall we say, overzealous observers in our building, Reading's chief texted me from home to check in, but those same SO deputies were here on site and we were able to process ballots and count the votes. So I very much appreciate the partnership and coordination. I am very proud to introduce to you all Kim Alexander, president and founder of the California Voter Foundation. Kim has been a trailblazer and an amazing advocate for California voters for the past 3 decades. I'm pleased to report that CVF has been at the front lines in examining the issues around online harassment of election officials and was instrumental in getting the urgency clause added to SB 1131 that was signed this week by the governor. CVF's work for the past 2 years to protect election officials and election administration is a model for advocates across the country. Kim?
Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks, Cathy, for that nice introduction. I want to introduce our speakers that we have joining us today. You'll see on the screen, we have Attorney General Rob Bonta, followed by FBI Special Agent Ethan Quinn, then Neil Kelly, Chair of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, followed by Princeton University's Bridging Divides Initiative presentation by Shannon Hiller and Theo Sither. And they will share their de-escalation resources. Usman Alu of the Council on American Islamic Relations will share de-escalation tips for bystanders. And we'll hear a video statement from Secretary of State Dr. Shirley Weber, followed by agency staff Jan Aline and Steve Reyes. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature. During this presentation, we will do our best to answer questions throughout the event. This webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available on CVF's website and on our YouTube page. So for those who miss it today, you can let your colleagues and friends know that they can watch it later. Our work in this area has included this report that we published documenting and addressing harassment of election officials. We're sharing a link for that in the chat. And we also are now compiling resources and news articles about protecting election officials on our website. And most recently, the California Voter Foundation worked with the Brennan Center to get Senate Bill 1131 enacted. This was just signed into law on Monday by Governor Newsom, and it provides address confidentiality protections for California election workers and other government employees. So we're very happy to have had that bill signed. CVF is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We were established in 1994, and we've been working on election security for over 2 decades. We also provide nonpartisan election information on our website at Calvoter.org. We are living in a time of heightened political violence and threats, and we organized this event to bring local election officials and law enforcement officers together in advance of the November 8th election to promote communication and relationship building to better address any potential conflicts that that may arise before, during, and after Election Day. We also have in attendance several nonprofit leaders throughout California who are involved in poll monitoring, election observation, and the Election Protection Program and conflict resolution, and I welcome them as well. So now I'm going to invite all the speakers to, except for Attorney General Bonta, to turn off their cameras and for Samantha to end the slideshow, and we will hear from Attorney General Rob Bonta. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and appreciate the work that you do, the kind introduction, and thank you to your entire team at the California Voter Foundation for improving the voter process to better serve Californians. That's your mission. And my gratitude does not end there to all the election officials and members of law enforcement joining us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are democracy's backbone. You ensure the people of California can exercise their vote and their voice, their fundamental rights. Especially in recent years, your jobs have never been more essential, but also never more difficult. In 2020, we witnessed a historic attempt to overturn a federal election and subvert our laws. The fallout remains with us today. According to the Brennan Center, 1 in 6 local election officials have experienced threats because of their job. 77% say that they feel these threats have increased in recent years. Law enforcement is not immune. In fact, just weeks ago, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security released a bulletin warning of increased threats to law enforcement and government officials across the nation. These threats are simply unacceptable. You are the stewards of democracy, and when you are threatened, when our laws are threatened, so is our nation. Despite the grave challenges you face, what I'm most impressed by is your sustained commitment to public service. You persist, donning your badge to protect our communities, working early mornings and late into the night to ensure our very democracy. And as we get closer to Election Day, and in California, what is essentially an election month, it's imperative that law enforcement and election officials work together to ensure peace at the polls, to ensure voters can exercise their voice without intimidation. Election officials can do their jobs without harassment, and law enforcement can keep the peace without threats to their safety. By building bridges now, by coordinating and fostering relationships between local law enforcement agencies and election officials today, we can ensure a safe election day on November 8th. Because just like with democracy, we all have a role to play when it comes to protecting voters, encouraging election participation, and ensuring public safety. At the California Department of Justice, we will continue to do our part, teaming up with our Secretary of State to inform voters of their voting rights, including their right to be protected from intimidation, issuing bulletins to the public and law enforcement, which are available on our website that highlight voter rights, as well as the relevant laws that law enforcement may be called upon to enforce, standing up for our voter rights in court, calling on Congress to pass legislation to fight voter suppression and election subversion. And on Election Day, we will have a team of attorneys across the state ready to provide technical and legal assistance to the Secretary of State as needed to help enforce our state's election laws, to make sure Californians can freely exercise their right to vote. Elections are administered at the local level, and as you team up to protect our democracy, we want to do all we can to support and protect you. If you need assistance or guidance, reach out to my office, to the Secretary of State's office. We are here to help. Because in every election, democracy is on the line, and by working together, we fortify that line. I know firsthand what happens when we don't. As the proud son of an immigrant mother from the Philippines, my family left my birth country because when a dictator came to power, we lost our freedoms, including the right to vote in free and fair elections. Democracy requires sustained work from all of us to ensure freedom is never lost. It requires working together, just as we do today, and just as I hope we do on Election Day. Thank you for your stewardship of our democracy, for your everyday efforts, and your renewed commitment to building relationships that will foster peace at the polls. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Bonta, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Next, we are going to hear from Special Agent Ethan Quinn from the San Francisco FBI Field Office. Ethan.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ethan Quinn. I'm the Election Crimes Coordinator for the San Francisco office of the FBI. My responsibilities include evaluating potential criminal violations of election-related federal law, and I'll briefly explain what the FBI's role is in ensuring Americans enjoy fair, safe, and free elections. Elections are a civil process run by state and local election officials. The FBI has no role in conducting elections. In fact, the FBI is prohibited from conducting activities at a polling place, so FBI agents will not be present during voting. That's a role for our local partners. As such, any imminent threat of violence should be reported to local law enforcement. They're better equipped to quickly address threats. Our role is investigating. There are a number of matters under our purview, but for today, we're focused on protecting civil rights of election workers and voters. Due to the dramatic increase in threats against all manner of state and local election workers, the U.S. Department of Justice created the Threats to Election Workers Task Force. Many of you have heard from this task force. Our goal is to ensure all allegations of threats to election workers, where appropriate, are aggressively mitigated, investigated, and prosecuted to ensure election workers conduct their jobs free of threats. I've personally conducted some of these investigations, and we will follow up on complaints to include conducting knock and talk interviews of threatening subjects. As of June 2022, the Department of Justice reviewed over 1,000 reports to the task force in which contact of a threatening or harassing nature, and we determined that approximately 11% met federal criteria for further investigative action. Analysis of reported conducts that met federal criteria revealed the following. 58% were in states that underwent 2020 public election disputes, recounts, and audits. Contacts with election workers came through multiple communication modes, including emails, social media posts, telephone calls, letters, or in person. Email was the most frequent communication platform. When the source was identified, 50% of the time, the source contacted the election worker more than once. Of the identified sources, 46% appear to be in a different state than the election worker. What we request is that election workers contact their local FBI office with any allegations of threats, harassment, or intimidation that the election worker deems appropriate for referral. I know making a referral to law enforcement and the FBI can feel like a big step. We don't want election workers to have to figure out if the harassment meets the standard for federal prosecution. Please report the incident and preserve any records. Let us do the work. Each field office has an election crimes coordinator. The 4 field offices of California are Sacramento, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. If you already don't have the direct number for your election crimes coordinator, you can contact the general line for any of the field offices and ask for election crimes coordinator. You can also contact me and I will get you in touch with the appropriate field office. Keep in mind, the FBI is subject to federal transparency laws, but not California state open records requests. So I'd recommend just giving us a call if you want to ensure close hold of the information. We're fortunate in California that reports of other government officials being the source of threats to election workers are very rare. However, if that does happen, if an official is using their office to unlawfully interfere with the election process, that is a matter for the FBI. Please give us a call. We obviously prefer to work in close collaboration with our local law enforcement partners, but we will operate independently if circumstances require. Thank you to Calvoter for hosting us and for all your attention and work. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Special Agent Quinn, for your presentation. We really appreciate it. And Samantha did drop into the chat the contact information for all of California's FBI field offices and election crime coordinators. Next, we're going to hear from Neil Kelly. Ask him to turn on his camera. Neil's with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, and I know he's no stranger to many of folks in the elections community here in California as the former Orange County Registrar of Voters. Neil's going to show a video that's hot off the video presses, and it is includes some content that some people may find disturbing. So I just want to give you folks a warning that it may cut a little close to home for some of you, but I think it packs a good message in about the value of communication. So I'll turn it over to Neil.
Kim, thank you so much. And thank you to the California Voter Foundation for putting this event on. This is, I think, a wonderful opportunity to collaborate among law enforcement and election officials. It doesn't seem too long ago that I retired as the Registrar of Voters from Orange County, but I was quickly pulled out for something that I think was very important, and that is the work to reduce the risk of violence against voters, polling places, and election officials. And I serve as the chairman, as Kim mentioned, for the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, which I'll talk a little bit about more in just a second. But before I show our video, this is something that we worked on over the last 3 or 4 months. And the goal behind this is twofold. One is to increase collaboration between election officials and law enforcement. But it is targeted towards law enforcement, specifically to brief law enforcement personnel on election crimes and how election issues related to threats against election officials can escalate very quickly. So if you'll indulge me for just a second, I would like to show you this brief video designed to build collaboration.
Department revealing a Texas man has now been charged for allegedly making death threats against elections officials.
You frauded out America on the real
and threats to our personal safety.
You're gonna pay for it.
Communist. You will be served lead.
There is no question we are living in a time where the potential for violence surrounding politics and political issues is high. Regardless of political affiliation, individuals and groups of individuals commit violent acts, threaten public officials, and attempt to disrupt our country's fair and impartial election system with increasing frequency and intensity. The Committee for Safe and Secure Elections has produced this video briefing to inform both elections officials and law enforcement.
Morning.
Morning, Miriam.
Do I know you?
I know you. Good luck today.
Nora 34, copy call.
Nora 34?
Nora 34, suspicious circumstances, 3485 Dunmore Ave, 3485 Dunmore.
Nora 34 en route.
Hello, I'm Deputy Buff at the Sheriff's Office. This is my training officer, Corporal Von Swan. I understand that you called in today.
Yeah, I'm an election official, and I just...
In recent years, an unprecedented number of election officials in the U.S. have received threats or have experienced other suspicious circumstances relating to their job. It is imperative that every occurrence is reported and thoroughly investigated by law enforcement.
I mean, it's probably nothing. I don't know what to make of it, but I got a license plate number if you want it.
Nice, yeah. You'd be surprised how many people don't get that. Got him.
Alonzo.
Hey, Captain, it's Von Swan.
Did you get my email?
Just a second. He just came in this morning?
Yeah, it was probably 90 minutes ago.
All right.
Yeah, I've got an overzealous trainee. It's probably nothing.
Listen, I'll be at my desk in just a couple of minutes and I'll look into it.
Will do. Thank you, sir.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Not a good day for it.
Yeah, that's all right. Hey, I found this is probably nothing, but figure you should take a look at it.
Okay.
go to the house.
Let's go.
Bill,
Marianne.
I was just going to call you.
Sometimes a simple phone call can make the difference between success and failure. Recognizing what constitutes a crime in regards to each state's election laws can be challenging, lacking proper communication and resources. Law enforcement's familiarity with its state's election laws can drastically improve the effectiveness when responding to calls relating to elections and election officials.
Hey, you need to take a look at this.
Bill, can you hold on a second? Bill, I'm sending you some links. This is the guy. He's posting threats.
Yep, that's the guy. Miriam, we've got your back.
This guy's bought and paid for. He shows up, we take him.
Take out the trash! 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 Take out the trash!
It's him.
Take out the trash! Take out the trash!
Move in, move in.
Let's go.
Take out the trash!
The Committee for Safe and Secure Elections recommends 5 actions election officials and law enforcement can take together. 1. Meet with counterparts and other stakeholders. 2. Share experiences, contact information, election details, and expectations. 3. Agree to work together regularly and define rules of engagement where voters are present. 4. Plan incident response, information sharing, and crisis communication. 5. Practice information sharing and response plans. Threats to our election workers can disrupt our safe and secure elections, which are vital to all of our democratic processes. It is all of our responsibility to work together, know our state and federal laws, and take every threat seriously.
Thank you very much. I do want to take just a few minutes to talk about the committee itself and some of the other work that we are doing currently to build and bridge these gaps. So I'm going to reshare my screen here real quickly. The Committee for Safe and Secure Elections was formed back in April of this year. It's a 32-member body made up of elected sheriffs and chiefs of police, as well as election officials and state election officials from around the country. Our mission is pretty clear, and that is, I won't read the whole thing to you here, but look for ways to reduce the risk of threats against election officials and to build relationships between local election officials and law enforcement. It's probably not lost on any of you that many of these issues have been growing, and as we move into the midterms as well as 24, we see indications of these threats increasing, and there are a number of organizations that are tracking these threats in addition to law enforcement. We have three goals, and that is to build trust and stronger relationships. It's not that relationships don't exist between election officials and law enforcement, but we want to encourage a different type of relationship, and that is working proactively ahead of election day. One of the things that I want to make very clear is we're not advocating for an armed response to polling places. In fact, there are 5 states that require police officers to be positioned at polling places. There are 16 states that are silent on the issue, but there are 29 states that prohibit law enforcement at polling places unless they're called on official business. We're not advocating for an armed response. We're advocating for working together and building relationships ahead of election day and working on intelligence that can reduce the risk together. And then finally, to create and share resources, which I'll get into in just a minute. The Attorney General spoke at the top of some of the data that's come out. And currently right now, we know that 3 and 4 election officials feel that these threats against them have increased in recent years. And in fact, 3 and 5 election officials are talking about the difficulty in recruiting poll workers to serve at polling places. I had an opportunity recently to have a meeting at the White House where there were several poll workers present and talking about not feeling safe about working at the elections in the midterms or in 24. So this is a real concern. Just very briefly, this screen here shows you the response time of law enforcement in these major cities across the country. And the reason I bring that up is if you call 911, this is the average response time. But if you have an investigation that may drag on for some time related to a threat against an election official, that can be up to a year or more, depending on the type of investigation. So the further that you can work in advance, that helps law enforcement on these investigations. One of the things that we want to do is to build those relationships. One of the ways that that can be done is to reach out to law enforcement on behalf of an election official and have discussions ahead of time. In Orange County, I work closely with our Fusion Center. We had weekly meetings in advance of the election. Those teams of law enforcement personnel were able to visit my vote centers before I opened to do security assessments. There's a number of things that can be taken ahead of time. And if you have that relationship in place, when something does happen, God forbid on election day, you can easily reach out. Law enforcement is there to support us as election officials, and they've shown that across the country in very positive ways. And then finally, we want to equip law enforcement and election officials with tools and resources that they can use to build and bridge these gaps. Our website is safeelections.org. You can find a number of resources on there. I just want to talk to you about a couple of them. Tabletop exercises we are offering across the country between law enforcement and election officials in advance of election day. We're currently conducting several of these across the country and happy to come to your jurisdiction to assist. The Law Enforcement Pocket Guide has become very popular. Very briefly, when I was in Orange County, I went to a polling place where there was a scuffle. It was between 2 candidates. It escalated. 911 was called by the local poll workers, and I arrived and local law enforcement was on scene. And the patrol officers, to their credit, were asking lots of questions, but they came up to me and said, "We think this is a civil matter and we're going to be on our way." And I had to point out to them that there were a couple of election crimes that potentially had been committed, and they had no idea. And that's no fault of those law enforcement officers. They're not dealing with elections on a daily basis. This is something that comes around every couple of years. So this pocket guide was designed to provide law enforcement officers with relevant election crime code sections in each individual state. We successfully deployed that in Orange County to all 34 cities, and it's become very successful. It's now across the state of Wisconsin, it's across Michigan, it's going across the state of Virginia, and this is expanding nationwide. So if you are local law enforcement, we're happy to provide these pocket guides to you specific to your state, wherever you might be. Finally, just to recap in that video, we're asking election officials and law enforcement to do 5 things: meet and discuss the issues ahead of time, share information. For instance, in Orange County, I provided vote center locations and names of poll workers ahead of election day to law enforcement. Agree to have a plan in place and do that plan, and then practice ahead of time. We had real-time exercises in Orange County prior to election day between law enforcement and my team, and that was very helpful as we moved into election day. So just as a reminder, safeelections.org, and very briefly before I leave, I do want to thank our organizers, the Brennan Center, Protect Democracy, R Street Institute, and the Elections Group. And thank you, Kim, once again, the California Voter Foundation, for the awesome work that you do.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you for sharing that video, and we did drop a link to that video in the chat. Next, we're going to hear from Shannon Hiller and Theo Sither with Princeton's Bridging Divides Initiative.
Thanks so much, Kim. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today. As Sam brings up our slides, I'll just say that, it was great to see the video that Neil shared focused on law enforcement, really as a familiar way to contextualize why responding quickly to threats to election officials is so critical. At the same time, what we'll share are even more perspectives and methods, including some that may feel critical to communities who have mixed relationships with law enforcement. As you'll hear, we at BDI think a whole of society response is critical. So many stakeholders, including all those that we're discussing here, working together to keep our elections safe. I'll start a bit on the next slide with who we are at BDI and why we do this work, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague Theo to dig into some of the specific de-escalation resources we have. So as you can see, BDI is a nonpartisan research initiative based at Princeton that focuses on tracking and mitigating political violence in the US specifically. And we do this work to support communities to build and grow resilience through periods of heightened tension, and that very much includes elections here, as you all know well. We also recognize that this is really short-term mitigation work, and for it to have a long-term impact, we have to connect it to the work we need to do to bridge the divides we face as a nation overall. On the next slide, we'll just very briefly touch on how we do this work specifically. Much of it revolves around getting the right information in the right hands at the right time, so that individuals, organizations, and leaders such as yourself can act together to tackle political violence, ideally before it even happens, exactly as Neil was emphasizing. These are our three areas of work, but for today, we'll be focusing on de-escalation, which we see as part of our collaboration portfolio really, but really cross-cuts across all of our research and policy work as well. On the next slide, just to sort of ground why we think de-escalation is so critical to addressing political violence or electoral violence specifically. First, to recognize that it's part of an overall strategic response. A lot of our work around de-escalation evolved in direct response to demand from different community stakeholders looking to keep their community safe and feeling like they didn't have practical tools to do that. At the same time, you'll hear that folks really wanted not just to be defensive, but to be proactively protecting civic space and something positive. So to push back on actors who use threats or harassment for their own goals or to shut down civic space where we can all participate. In addition, I think these can be really powerful tools because they're useful beyond elections as well in other roles where your volunteers might work in school boards, city planning meetings, or honestly, as we know, in our everyday life. And you'll hear more in a moment from Theo and others and other experts in de-escalation and how they're really experts all around us. This is a skill that a lot of community centers have already, and there's available trainings to you. So supporting their good work, engaging with trainers and folks in your own community is always really positive for building long-term resilience. And finally, more from the research space, we've heard from folks that we're sort of creating training and doing de-escalation work together can be like working towards a shared goal. So protecting civic space together, regardless of party affiliations. And we know from the research that can actually build greater unity when done well. So in this broader context, BDI's projects focus on three main components that you'll hear from Theo about in a moment. The first is general guides with rules of thumb created by experts, but really just introductory or base level tools. The second are how you can access trainers in your own community, and you'll hear from one of those today at the end of the session, which is great. And the third is how you can access more support from our team or others we work with to match you to other virtual online resources depending on your situation. So with that, I'll hand it off to Theo for the next section.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and thank you to the California Voter Foundation for including us in this session today. As Shannon mentioned, I'm going to kind of quickly review our toolkit, our directory, and ways in which we can kind of support and engage with you in the important work that you're doing and help to support the democratic process locally. So first up, just on the toolkit, as Shannon mentioned, BDI itself, while our primary focus is on research, we're also ensuring that we want to make sure that we get the right tools into the right hands at the right time. And so we work with the issue area expert organizations, the training organizations that exist to provide trainings, to provide kind of quick reference guide resources focused on, particularly at the beginning, focused on four different communities. One is for local elected officials that are in the midst of planning public meetings that could turn tensions. And again, these guides were meant as resources to plan ahead to ensure that there's prevention, that they're prepared to prevent any disruptions or violence that could take place in those civic spaces. The second was geared towards community members and volunteers that might be present in those civic spaces, in those public meetings, and the role that they could play as active bystanders to de-escalate, to prevent tension, and to ensure that the democratic process kind of moves forward in those civic spaces. And then thirdly, we released a resource geared towards law enforcement, particularly the role that community members can play and how they can engage with law enforcement in those spaces and the appropriate role that law enforcement should play in terms of de-escalation in those spaces. And then finally, our guide geared towards poll workers. On the next slide, I wanted to particularly highlight our poll worker resource for our audience here today. And it's a one-page guide that helps poll workers to reference the key principles and the planning that's necessary ahead of the election process, ahead of election day. And then highlighting a particular methodology on the next slide that many experts in the field use for de-escalation. We call it the Clara method, and you can certainly read more about that. Our colleague from CARE is going to be doing a short session on de-escalation and bystander intervention in the next presentation. So I don't want to get into the details of that. So this is our toolkit. And on the next slide, we have, in addition to these quick reference guides, as people are wanting to dig deeper and get trained in de-escalation, part of our work has been to create a state-by-state directory of organizations that are willing to provide the training. We've been in touch with all of the organizations that we've listed on our website, and so that you can have access to them. And the California resource, which we've highlighted in the next slide, includes one of the training organizations that's going to be here today. Usman from CARE is going to be doing a short training with us, and a conflict resolution center based out of Santa Cruz County. This is a part of our growing list of organizations. We're constantly in the process of adding new orgs to our directory, and as we get in touch with them and as we kind of document and record the trainings that they're providing. In terms of, on the next slide, I wanted to, particularly kind of highlight that the role that BDI can play, because of the engagement that we've had with organizations on the ground that are doing the training. We're there as a resource to you. Feel free to get in touch with us to really actively connect you with the training resources that you need. On this screen, I mean, there are really a variety of different organizations that provide the training. We're happy to help make that match, get the right tools into the right hands at the right time. And finally, BDI is also available, as it's highlighted on our final slide here, and that we're available to provide briefings, provide customized, whether it's private or public briefings based on the research that we're doing, on the tracking that we're doing on our research team. We produce public reports and briefs as well as mapping of different actors and events around the country. So I'll stop there and hand it over to my colleague from CARE. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Theo, for that presentation. And I'll invite Usman to join us on camera. Usman Alu is with the Council on American Islamic Relations, San Francisco Bay Area office. And many of us in elections are new to this issue of political violence, but sadly there are some organizations in our country that have been struggling with this problem for years, and the elections community can benefit from their experience. So Usman, I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kim. And also thank you, Theo, and to Shannon for the work that you all do with BDI and for getting me involved here. Let me go ahead and share my screen really quick for everybody here. Awesome. So today, just thinking about as other marginalized communities, just thinking about focusing on a specific problem that many of us experience, especially as marginalized communities. So hate crimes, hate incidents, and also harassment, and a specific way of addressing that problem, which is bystander intervention, especially as community members, as poll workers, whoever we might be. It is the most immediate and immediate way of addressing this type of problem, and also general hate crimes, hate incidences, and bias, especially at the verbal level, and de-escalating at that level before, right, non-violently before, preventing violence as well. And this training, there's value in it both because it's a way to provide short-term relief and safety for marginalized and targeted communities, and also because it's a really good way for community members to start getting involved in larger term struggles for justice. So in thinking about this training and kind of why we do it and why we think there's value in here too, I just want to read a couple important statistics that really are, that bring this closer to home. So from a 2021 study by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, they documented 173% increase in anti-AAPI centered, specifically hate crimes in Los Angeles. And then also thinking about here where I'm at in the Bay Area, they documented a 567% increase in hate crimes and incidences of harassment and bias. Also, again, looking at AAPI hate there as well, and that's in 2021. So just thinking about this training and why it's critical, it's important for us as general community members and as bystanders to really practice and be ready and prepared to actually step in, in the unfortunate scenario that many of us might actually face this. And as, as a member of a marginalized community, it's far too often that many of us experience this. So, and looking at our training here, what I want to focus on is we're going to look at a specific scenario here, but this training is used in a general way, and the steps that I'm going to go over and also the values really briefly, they kind of they're able to prepare you for a variety of different scenarios. And bigger than just this example. So in thinking about how we can nonviolently de-escalate, and as a bystander, we think about three important values, which are safety, support, and solidarity. And those will work hand in hand with the steps that we're about to go over here, and making sure that we're there to support, provide safety, and be in solidarity with somebody that's being targeted. So in looking at these steps here that I have, right? The first step to kind of looking at a bystander intervention is assessing the situation. So that means, of course, being ready to intervene. So it's important, whether I'm a community member, a poll worker, whoever I might be, to make sure that I'm, mentally, emotionally prepared to step in, and I'm able to do this, right? So it's kind of like a brief, mental health check right there, or a brief, am I ready for this? And then also, in terms of assessing the situation, right, it's important to be aware of what's happening. And for many of us in groups that are often targeted, many of us are already aware of our surroundings, our, where we're at, our location, etc. So again, just emphasizing to be aware of what's happening and what is going on around us, at all times, again. And also being able to hear and see, right, what is happening around you. And this could look like a number of different ways too. Like I know many of us, like me, myself, while we're waiting, wherever we might be, we might have headphones in. A good way to kind of be aware of what's going on is to take a headphone out, just so we know what's happening. We can also be able to hear what's going on around us. So that's our first step, right? Assessing the situation, which leads us to getting others involved. And that means beating the bystander effect. So for those of you that may not know or may not heard of this, the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where the more people that are present to actually witness an event, the less likely any of them will be to step in and help. And this is because we disperse our responsibility onto the people around us, but you really have the power to return someone's responsibility to them by simply letting them know that they should be acting. And that could look something like, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think we should get involved, or I think we should do something. And, guiding people that way will be more likely to get them involved as well. And then just giving directions, right? So once you've involved people around you, it's important that you take lead and give other bystanders directions, especially because you never know how many, many folks don't have de-escalation training or even this bystander intervention training, but you do. So being able to guide them is a way to actually physically get them involved, right? And that can look, again, something like, hey, can you stay here and record what is happening? And I'll go talk to the targeted person. And you can safely, involve other bystanders as well. So moving on from there, we think about intervening calmly. So introducing yourself and quietly explaining what you saw, what was happening, and you would like to be there to provide support. So it's important to be aware of your tone, your body language, your physical, your demeanor as you move closer to a targeted person so they don't perceive you as a threat as well. And it's best to come in at eye level with a calm tone, right? And when introducing yourself, it's also best to be straightforward and say something like, hi, my name is, in this example, Usman, and I saw what was happening and I'd like to be here and support you. In this scenario, can I sit next to you, or can I stand next to you, or stand with you, whatever it might look like, right? And then again, just asking for permission before doing anything. If the person says that they're fine and they don't want support, we respect that, but move back, but also don't just leave the situation, right? Move back and be there to monitor what's going on. So you can let the targeted person know that, hey, I'll be nearby in case you change your mind or in case you need anything. I'm here, I'm not leaving. Maybe these other bystanders are with me, will be involved, just within the situation as well. Which then leads us to one of the most pivotal steps, right? Especially when looking at these scenarios as a community member at the verbal level, right? And verbal harassment, verbal hate, whatever it might look like. So our fourth step here is ignoring the attacker in this general situation, right? So that means even if they escalate verbally, which oftentimes many folks do, right? And we believe that ignoring the attacker, right, it has a greater chance of actually de-escalating the situation. But of course, that isn't guaranteed, right? Every situation, every circumstance looks different. But if the attacker doesn't de-escalate quickly, it's important to think of alternate solutions. And again, if a situation does become violent or, there is a perceived threat of violence, please, think of other alternative solutions that may include getting other officials involved, right? And also when thinking about assessing, what's going on and the situation around you, again, just being aware of the attacker's location and also the exit routes for yourself as well. And then our final step is just continuing to support the person, letting them know that they should report this incident to CARE or the ACLU or any other, resource as well that's been mentioned. And then just making sure that somebody has the resources they need and making sure that they get to their destination safely. So again, I'll kind of finish up here really quickly. So kind of the steps, right? Assessing the situation, getting others involved, intervening calmly, right? Introducing yourself. You saw what's happening, you're there to support, ignoring the actual attacker in the situation, even if they verbally escalate, and also being aware of what's around you, right? And then, of course, continuing to support the targeted person throughout, before, during, and after, right? And providing resources as needed. And that's the general steps, which, of course, they're used as a foundation, as a way to intervene in a variety of different scenarios. And let me go ahead and stop my share here for everyone. So get back and yeah, we always here to provide more resources, especially in the BDI has published a great resource and great toolkit for everybody with a lot of resources, including our own from CARE and the Council of American Islamic Relations. And we're always working to, educate folks and to train as well throughout. So thank you all. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Usman. That was terrific. Really great tips and skills to share. Thank you so much. We're going to now hear from California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber. She's not able to join us in person today. And given that election controversies are often arising out of concerns about election security, we thought it'd be helpful to show this short video the Secretary recently made for an election cybersecurity conference also happening today, explaining how California works to keep our elections secure. So we're going to cue that up for you and give that a play.
Hello, I'm Dr. Shirley Weber, California Secretary of State. And as Secretary of State, I have many roles, but one of my main roles is being California's Chief Election Officer. So I want to thank everyone here today for joining this important conversation on election cybersecurity. In California, we take election cybersecurity very seriously. And because elections are run at the county level, it is the duty of the Secretary of State to take a holistic approach to election cybersecurity. For example, in California, if a county wants a new voting system, it must receive certification and undergo months of rigorous state testing. This means including functional testing, source code review, red team security testing, and accessibility and volume testing. We also require that every ballot must either be paper or have a voter verifiable paper audit trail. Our office continually updates and expands cyber attack prevention capabilities, and our infrastructure security measures are comprehensive and multi-layered. My office monitors misinformation and disinformation trends, and we counter those false narratives with our own content that we share with our partners. Our post provides accurate information and ensure voters know that state and local elected officials are trusted sources of election information. The California Secretary of State's office works around the clock to make sure your vote is safe and secure. Today's conference is a great gathering, and I wish I could be there in person to take back some of the great information being shared. But we must understand that the goal of mis and disinformation is to diminish trust in our elections and prevent citizens from voting. So you be sure to vote and know that your vote will count when you vote this coming November. Thank you very much for hearing me, and I look forward to a wonderful conference and the information.
Great. And now we're going to hear from Steve Reyes and Janaline with the California Secretary of State's office.
Hi, how are you doing, everybody? Couple of things. My name's Steve Reyes. I'm Chief Counsel here with the California Secretary of State's office, and Janaline is the Elections Division Chief for the California Secretary of State. So Kim, how would you like to proceed from this point on?
Well, we wanted to cover a couple of quick points about taking photos versus ballot selfies. I thought maybe you could clear that up. That issue came up during our planning of this event. What's the difference between a ballot selfie versus photographing other people at a voting site?
Sure. So recently, California authorized the ability of voters to take ballot selfies. So just holding up their ballot, taking a selfie with it, maybe with the candidates marked on their ballot. And sometimes we know that now, since then, some registrar's office to encourage people voting and coming in and have put little backgrounds up away from the voting location, but on the voting site premises. So that's kind of what the ballot selfie is. There had been some questions as to whether that was legal or not. The legislature clarified that it was. However, what is not legal is and could constitute intimidation or voter intimidation is taking pictures and video of somebody voting including, perhaps capturing the types of choices they are making on their ballot themselves while they're casting vote. All of those things can be considered voter intimidation. And local election officials, poll workers, et cetera, are empowered to assess the moment and understand what is actually happening there in a particular location, which is going to be very fact specific, and make a determination as to whether to approach the individuals who are engaging in any behavior like that and ask them to cease and contact law enforcement if necessary, if they can't be de-escalated otherwise. Jenna, anything to add on that piece?
Sure. So we do make sure that county elections officials are advised, and poll workers, they need to exercise discretion on whether a ballot selfie could cause disruption to the overall voting process. We make it explicitly outlined in the law that it prohibits, there's prohibitions on the unauthorized sharing and the use of information about how a person voted, if somebody is receiving any kind of consideration for voting, and definitely whether or not it interferes with the conduct of the election or the duties of the election official. Again, we ask county election officials and poll workers to be trained further regarding whether or not it's considered intimidation and if it compromises the privacy of others casting their vote.
Great, thank you. And I understand that the Secretary of State's office recently issued some new guidance about electioneering and voter intimidation. Can you talk a little bit about where people can find that?
Sure. All that information can be found on the California Secretary of State in the elections page. We put out lots of advisories before every election relating to election law and different things relating to how things need to be conducted on election day. I know there's always questions about electioneering and what's allowable, what's not, within the 100 feet and where that 100 feet starts. There's actually a requirement for election officials and for our office to post information on the notices of what can and cannot be done, specifically what's not allowed at polling locations and what's not allowed by observers. While we want to make it really clear that the elections are open for observation, we also need to make sure that folks understand what their rights and responsibilities are.
Great. And those photo rules around not taking pictures of voters, do those apply for people dropping ballots off in drop boxes as well?
Well, there is some specific information you can find in the law. It's California Elections Code, and this is what I always go back to. People probably get sick of me saying it. Election Code Section 338.5 is a very distinct definition of what electioneering is. Of course, we do put out communications to counties that kind of spell out a little bit more about, what could be considered electioneering. However, it's really specific that at the entrance of a building that contains a polling location or an elections official's office or satellite location where voting is happening is if any electioneering is done within that 100 feet. It also includes outside, including curbside voting or a drop-off location.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to invite all the panelists to turn their cameras back on and come on screen. I want to thank everybody for coming today to our Peace at the Polls California briefing. And we will make a recording of this webinar available on our YouTube page. We will send that out to everyone. You'll get a message as an attendee from Zoom with the links to this event and to that video. And we also have an electronic newsletter if you want to receive that or follow us on social media. I hope you'll do so. I'll turn it over to Cathy to say some final words.
Thanks so much, Kim. I am just blown away by the amazing information we got today, and I'm hopeful that this will help to facilitate local election officials connecting with law enforcement. Neil, that video is outstanding. I can't wait to get it to my local partners, and I'm sure many other county officials feel the same way. I know John Tudor does because he asked 16 questions about it. We'll get it to you, John, I swear. But thanks everybody for being here today. We really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.